The boardroom erupted in laughter when the billionaire CEO demanded the janitor predict whether a $2.3 billion deal would soar or crash. But when Thomas Reed's first words cut through the mockery like a blade, Harrison Drake's smirk died on his lips, and 47 floors below, Wall Street held its breath. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what happens next. The fluorescent lights of Sterling and Drake Capital hummed their monotonous electric song as Thomas Reed guided his cleaning cart across the marble floors of the 47th story. It was 9:43 p.m. on a Thursday, and the building's pulse had slowed to that peculiar rhythm unique to corporate towers after dark. The desperate energy of executives trying to prove their worth through sheer hours logged, the quiet desperation of ambition wrapped in expensive cologne and cheaper coffee. Thomas had learned to move like water through these spaces. Invisible, unremarkable, just another fixture of the architecture, as permanent and unnoticed as the fire extinguishers or the abstract art that hung on walls at price points that would have covered his rent for 3 years. His gray maintenance uniform, worn soft from industrial washing, bore a name tag that simply read Tom. Not Thomas. Never Thomas here. Tom was friendlier, less threatening, the kind of name that reminded powerful people that he wasn't one of them and never would be. He'd been pushing this cart through these halls for 18 months now. 5 nights a week, 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., $18.50 an hour plus the kind of health insurance that was more theoretical than practical. It wasn't the life his college advisors had envisioned when he'd graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern with a degree in economics and a minor in mathematics. But then again, his advisors hadn't anticipated the peculiar way the world had of kneecapping people who didn't come pre-equipped with safety nets and family connections. The 2008 financial crisis had eaten his parents' hardware store. The recovery had been too late and too little. By the time Thomas finished his degree, paid for through a patchwork of scholarships, work-study programs, and the kind of student loans that felt less like debt and more like indentured servitude, the job market had become a gladiatorial arena where he'd shown up without a sword. Turns out an economics degree without an internship at Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley was just expensive wallpaper. Pretty, but ultimately decorative. So here he was, 28 years old, emptying trash bins for men who were younger than him, but somehow decades ahead in every metric that mattered to the world. The conference room glowed ahead of him like an aquarium filled with apex predators in suits. Through the glass walls, Thomas could see them. Harrison Drake's inner circle, his war council, the chosen few who got to sit at the table where billions moved like chess pieces. Harrison himself sat at the head, his posture that particular combination of relaxation and coiled energy that came naturally to men who'd never heard the word no in any language that mattered. Harrison Drake, 39 years old, self-made billionaire. If you ignored the small detail of the $2 million seed money from his venture capitalist father and the connections that came with a last name that opened doors before you even knocked. He'd built Sterling and Drake from a boutique investment firm into a $40 billion empire in just under 13 years. Forbes called him the Oracle of Lower Manhattan. Wall Street Journal said he had an almost supernatural ability to see 3 moves ahead of the market. Fortune had put him on their cover with the headline, "The Man Who Never Blinks." Thomas had read all those articles. He'd found them in the trash. He'd also found the pieces they didn't print. The angry, handwritten notes from Harrison's business partner, Julian Sterling, before he'd been quietly bought out and erased from the company's official history. The crumpled printouts of therapy bills. The email exchanges with lawyers about the prenup before Harrison's wedding to supermodel Christina Vance. And then the later emails about the divorce settlement. The prescription bottles in Harrison's private bathroom trash. Labels peeled off, but not quite thoroughly enough to hide the Xanax and Ambien. The trash told stories the press releases never would. And Thomas Reed had become fluent in the language of what people threw away. He keyed his access card against the sensor, and the conference room door clicked open. The conversation inside didn't pause. They'd long since learned to talk through him like he was background music. Thomas was good at his job, which meant being good at being invisible. The revenue projections are solid. a woman's voice was saying. Naomi Carter, VP of Acquisitions. Mid-30s, brilliant, with the kind of commanding presence that made junior analysts sit up straighter when she walked past their cubicles. She was one of 3 black executives in the company's leadership, and the only one who'd made it into Harrison's inner sanctum. Thomas had seen her work herself half to death for that seat. He'd emptied her office trash at midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., finding the remnants of meals eaten at her desk, the drafts of presentations revised and re-revised, the printouts covered in her precise handwriting as she caught errors no one else had noticed. She was good. Maybe too good for this room. NeuralSync's quantum encryption patent alone is worth the $2.3 billion asking price. Naomi continued, gesturing to the presentation on the screen. Add in their defense contracts and the AI integration pipeline, and we're looking at a conservative 340% ROI within 5 years. Thomas emptied the trash bin near the door, moving methodically around the room's perimeter. The conversation flowed around him. Talk of EBITDA and market penetration, of synergies and strategic positioning. The language of money, talking to money about making more money. Harrison Drake hadn't spoken yet. He sat with his fingers steepled, watching the presentation with eyes the color of winter ice. He wore his authority like other men wore cologne, invisibly but impossible to ignore. His suit was Savile Row, his watch was Patek Philippe, and his expression was carved from the same stone they used to build cathedrals and courthouses. Thomas had reached the trash bin next to where a junior analyst sat. Kevin something, fresh from Wharton, still had that eager puppy energy that hadn't been beaten out of him yet. The bin was full of crumpled printouts. Thomas had learned not to look too closely while he was in the room, but he'd also learned that peripheral vision was a beautiful thing. SEC filing. NeuralSync Technologies. Someone had printed the full document, all 437 pages of it, and thrown most of it away. But page 284 had been circled. A small notation about share transfers. Thomas filed the information away in the catalog he'd been building in his head. Not his business. Not his world. Just more trash. He was halfway around the room when Harrison Drake spoke for the first time. Stop. The single word cut through the presentation like a knife through silk. Naomi paused mid-sentence. Every person in the room went still in that particular way that prey animals do when they realize the predator is looking at them. But Harrison wasn't looking at any of them. He was looking at Thomas. You, Harrison said, and there was something in his voice. Amusement, maybe, or boredom, or that peculiar cruelty that sometimes bloomed in powerful men when they'd gone too long without entertainment. The janitor. How long had you worked here? Thomas looked up, meeting Harrison Drake's eyes for the first time in 18 months. 18 months, sir. 18 months. Harrison leaned back in his chair, and Thomas watched a smile play at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a kind smile. 18 months of cleaning this building. Emptying our trash. You must hear things. See things. He gestured broadly at the room, at the presentation still frozen on the screen. You've probably absorbed more financial education through osmosis than most MBAs get in 2 years of business school. A few people in the room chuckled. Naomi Carter didn't. She was watching Harrison with an expression Thomas couldn't quite read. Tell me, Harrison continued, and now there was definitely amusement in his voice. In your expert opinion, as our custodial engineer, should Sterling and Drake acquire NeuralSync Technologies for $2.3 billion? Is it a smart investment, or are we about to flush our money down the same toilets you clean every night? The room erupted in laughter. Real laughter this time, not the polite chuckles. Kevin from Wharton actually slapped the table. One of the senior analysts pulled out his phone, probably opening the video camera. This was theater. Thomas was the court jester, pulled into the spotlight to amuse the nobles. Harrison Drake's smile widened. He was enjoying this. Thomas stood there, one hand still on his cleaning cart, and looked at the presentation on the screen. Really looked at it. The revenue projections. The patent valuations. The 5-year growth model with its confident upward trajectory. He thought about the crumpled SEC filing in the trash can. Page 284, circled. He thought about 18 months of being invisible, of being furniture, of watching these people make decisions that moved billions while he made $18.50 an hour. He thought about his Northwestern degree, gathering dust in a folder in his studio apartment. He thought about his mother, working double shifts as a nurse in Cleveland, still paying off his father's medical bills 3 years after the funeral. And Thomas Reed made a decision. "You're asking the wrong question," he said quietly. The laughter died like someone had cut the power. Harrison's smile flickered. "Excuse me?" Harrison said, and his voice had gone very soft. That was worse than if he'd yelled. Thomas set down the trash bag he'd been holding. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, clear, and absolutely certain. "The question isn't whether Neuralink is worth $2.3 billion. The question is why Dr. Rebecca Vance, the founder and chief scientist, transferred 47% of her personal shares to the company's CTO, Michael Brandt, 3 weeks ago for 38 cents on the dollar. It's in the amended SEC filing, page 284. Someone in this room printed it, circled it, and threw it away." He nodded toward the trash bin. "It's an icon right there." The room had gone silent. Not the awkward silence from before, but something else. Something sharp. Naomi Carter had pulled out her tablet and was typing frantically. The CTO, Michael Brandt, has spent the last 6 weeks in quiet conversations with Helix Dynamics, Quantum Shield, and Northstar Defense Systems, Thomas continued. Not shopping the company, shopping the patents. Specifically, the quantum encryption patent that represents about 85% of Neuralink's valuation. I know because I emptied the trash in Harrison's office, and 2 weeks ago, there was a handwritten note from a contact at Helix Dynamics warning about Brandt's activities. Someone, Thomas looked directly at Harrison, thought it was worth writing down, but not worth following up on. Harrison Drake had gone very still. Neuralink's valuation is built on technology. Its current leadership is planning to strip and sell before your due diligence period ends, Thomas said. You're not buying an asset. You're buying an empty shell wrapped in venture capital projections and PowerPoint optimism. Dr. Vance sold her shares at a massive loss because she knows what's coming. She's getting out before the implosion. And you're planning to pay $2.3 billion for the privilege of holding the bag when it explodes. Someone's phone clattered onto the table. For 18 months, Thomas said, and now there was something in his voice, not anger exactly, but a kind of exhausted honesty that came from being invisible for too long. I've watched this company make billion-dollar decisions based on what people want to believe instead of what the evidence actually shows. The trash doesn't lie, Mr. Drake. People lie. Numbers can be massaged. Presentations can be perfected. But trash. He gestured to his card. Trash is honest. It's the gap between what you tell yourself and what you actually think. And right now, your trash is screaming that this deal is a disaster. But nobody in this room wanted to hear it because the projections looked good and the narrative was clean. Naomi Carter looked up from her tablet, her face ashen. He's right. All of it. The share transfer, the timeline, the patent discussions. It's all here. We missed it. How did we miss this? Because you weren't reading the trash, Thomas said simply. You were reading the pitch deck. Harrison Drake didn't move for exactly 7 seconds. Thomas counted them. He'd gotten good at reading the silences in this building, the spaces between words where the real decisions happened. This particular silence felt like standing on ice and hearing it crack beneath your feet. Then Harrison stood up, the motion smooth and controlled. He walked to the windows that overlooked Lower Manhattan's glittering sprawl, 47 floors of separation between himself and the people who lived in the world where $18 an hour mattered. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. Everyone out. The executives exchanged glances. Naomi Carter closed her tablet carefully, her movements precise. Harrison, the board presentation is scheduled for. Cancel it. Cancel everything tomorrow until I say otherwise. Harrison didn't turn from the window. Out. Now. Except you. He pointed at Thomas without looking. The janitor stays. The room emptied like water draining from a tub. Kevin from Wharton practically ran for the door. The senior analyst who'd been recording pocketed his phone and avoided eye contact with everyone. One by one, they filed out into the corridor, and Thomas could feel their stares like physical weight. Naomi was the last to leave. She paused at the door, looking between Harrison and Thomas with an expression that might have been concern or might have been recognition. The look of someone who just watched the social order rearrange itself in real time and wasn't sure whether to be horrified or impressed. "Harrison," she started. "Not now, Naomi." The door clicked shut with the finality of a coffin closing. Thomas stood next to his cleaning cart in a conference room that probably cost more to furnish than his entire childhood home had been worth. Harrison Drake remained at the window, his reflection ghost-like in the glass, the city lights making a halo around his silhouette. "Do you know what you just did?" Harrison asked the window. "Yes, sir." "Do you?" Harrison turned, and his expression was unreadable. "You just humiliated my VP of acquisitions in front of her team. You made my entire due diligence department look like incompetent children. You implied that I'm either careless or stupid. I haven't decided which is worse. And you did all of it while wearing a uniform that marks you as so far beneath notice in this building that most of my employees probably think you're furniture." Thomas said nothing. What was there to say? It was all true. "What's your name?" Harrison asked. "Your real name. Not what's on that badge." "Thomas Reed." "Thomas Reed." Harrison tested the name like he was tasting wine. "Tell me, Thomas Reed, what exactly did you think was going to happen here? Did you think I'd thank you? Give you a medal for humiliating my staff? Or did you just not think at all? Did you just decide to commit career suicide on a Thursday night because you were tired of being invisible?" There it was, the edge in his voice, the anger starting to bleed through the control. Thomas had wondered when it would come. "I thought," Thomas said carefully, "that you were about to lose $2.3 billion on a deal that anyone paying attention could see was fraudulent. And I thought that maybe, just maybe, it mattered more to tell you the truth than to protect your ego or mine." Harrison's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Protect your ego? You're a janitor. I'm aware. Are you?" Harrison walked toward him, each step measured. "Because from where I'm standing, you just ended your janitorial career. Hell, you probably ended any career in this industry. Do you think cleaning services are going to want to hire someone who humiliates their clients? Do you think any other firm on Wall Street will touch you after word gets out that you embarrassed Harrison Drake in front of his executive team?" Thomas felt something cold settle in his stomach. He hadn't thought about that. Or maybe he had, and he just hadn't cared in the moment. 18 months of being invisible had a way of building up pressure, and maybe tonight that pressure had finally found a crack to escape through. "So here's what's going to happen," Harrison continued, and his voice had gone soft again, that dangerous soft that Thomas had learned meant someone powerful was making decisions. "You're going to tell me everything. Every piece of trash you've read, every memo you've seen, every conversation you've overheard, every single thing you know about my company that I don't. And then I'm going to decide what to do with you." "Or?" Thomas asked. Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Or, you said that's what's going to happen. I'm asking what happens if I say no." For the first time since the conference room had emptied, Harrison Drake smiled. It was a real smile this time, not the performative cruelty from before. "You don't say no to me. Nobody says no to me." "I do." The smile vanished. "Excuse me." Thomas felt something shifting inside him, some fundamental equation rebalancing. "Already jumped off the cliff. Might as well enjoy the fall. You don't get to summon me for your amusement, mock me in front of your executives, and then demand I spill everything I know because you're scared. That's not how this works." "Scared?" Harrison's voice could have cut glass. "You think I'm scared of you?" "I think you're terrified," Thomas said, and he was surprised by how calm he sounded. "I think you just realized that someone you never bothered to see has been watching you for 18 months. I think you're doing the math on what else I might know, what other disasters might be hiding in the trash you never bothered to read. I think you built an empire on being smarter than everyone else in the room. And tonight you found out there's been someone in your building who's been seeing things you missed. And yes, Mr. Drake, I think that scares the hell out of you." The silence that followed was different from the others. This one had teeth. Harrison walked back to the conference table and sat down heavily in his chair. He looked at Thomas for a long moment, and Thomas watched something move behind those winter-colored eyes, some calculation happening at speeds that had made Harrison Drake a billionaire before he was 40. "Sit down," Harrison said. "I'm fine standing." That wasn't a request. Thomas considered, then pulled out one of the leather chairs and sat. The seat was still warm from whoever had occupied it during the presentation. He set his hands on the table, and the contrast was almost comical. His worn, calloused hands against the polished mahogany that probably cost more per square foot than Thomas made in a month. "Tell me about yourself," Harrison said. "The real story, not the resume version." "Why?" "Because I'm trying to figure out if you're brilliant or insane, and I need more data." Thomas almost laughed. "Northwestern, class of 2015. Economics major, mathematics minor. Graduated summa cum laude. My thesis was on market inefficiencies in crisis scenarios and how behavioral economics could predict panic selling better than traditional models." Harrison's expression shifted slightly. "Northwestern. That's not a small school. Full academic scholarship. Work-study programs. Student loans that I'll be paying off until I'm 50. Thomas kept his voice neutral, reciting facts like they belonged to someone else. "Graduated into a job market that wanted 2 years of experience for entry-level positions and family connections I didn't have. Applied to 247 positions in finance and economics. Got 31 rejection emails. For interviews, 0 offers. Turns out cultural fit is code for a lot of things, and none of them include kids from Cleveland whose dads own hardware stores." "So you became a janitor." "I became employed," Thomas corrected. "There's a difference. Student loans don't care about my dignity. Neither does my landlord." Harrison was quiet for a moment, studying him. "Why this building? Why Sterling and Drake?" Thomas met his eyes. "Because I wanted to see how it actually worked. The articles, the books, the case studies, they all tell you what decisions were made. None of them tell you how they actually happened. I figured if I couldn't get a seat at the table, I could at least watch from close enough to learn something." "And did you?" "Learn something. I learned that most billion-dollar decisions are made by people who are too afraid to admit they don't know everything. I learned that corporate culture punishes honesty and rewards confidence, even when the confidence is bullshit. I learned that the higher up you go, the less likely anyone is to tell you the truth." Thomas paused. "I learned that your entire operation is built on you being the smartest person in every room, which means you've surrounded yourself with people who've learned not to challenge you. They're too busy performing competence to actually be competent." Harrison's jaw tightened. "That's a hell of an accusation." "It's an observation. Your trash proves it." "My trash. Everyone's trash. The drafts of presentations with all the caveats and warnings that get deleted before the final version. The risk assessments that get printed, read, and thrown away without being shared. The emails about concerns that get crumpled up instead of sent. This building is full of intelligent people who've learned that their job security depends on telling you what you want to hear, not what you need to know." Harrison stood abruptly and walked back to the window. "If you're so smart, Thomas Reed for Northwestern, tell me, what should I do now? Fire everyone? Burn it all down? Start reading my own trash like some kind of corporate archaeologist?" "You should hire me," Thomas said. Harrison turned, and his expression was pure disbelief. "Hire you? Not as a janitor, as a partner." The laugh that came out of Harrison was sharp with genuine shock. "A partner? You want partnership in a $40 billion company because you can read trash. I want partnership because I'm the only person in this building who isn't afraid to tell you when you're wrong. You don't need another VP or another analyst. You've got plenty of those. What you need is someone who sees what everyone else has trained themselves to ignore. Someone who has nothing to lose by being honest with you." Thomas stood up. "I've spent 18 months being invisible. I've watched, I've learned, and I've seen patterns that your entire executive team missed because they were too busy protecting their positions to do their actual jobs. You can fire me, blacklist me, make sure I never work in finance again, or you can use me." Harrison stared at him for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he smiled. "You have balls, Thomas Reed. Insane, potentially suicidal balls, but balls nonetheless. Is that a yes?" "That's a, I'm going to think about it." Harrison walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "Finish your shift, clean the building, and tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., you come back to this conference room, or whatever you want. We're going to have a longer conversation about what happens next. And if I don't show up," Harrison's smile turned sharp. then you're fired, blacklisted, and you can add through away the opportunity of a lifetime to your list of bad decisions. 8 a.m. Thomas. Don't be late. He walked out, leaving Thomas alone in the conference room with his cleaning cart and the slowly dawning realization of what he'd just done. Through the windows, Manhattan glittered like a promise or a threat. Thomas wasn't sure which. He went back to his cart, picked up the trash bag, and continued his route. The trash still needed emptying after all, no matter how much everything else had changed. Thomas finished his shift at 2:17 a.m. The building had finally gone quiet, the last of the late-night warriors having surrendered to exhaustion or deadlines extended until morning. His cart wheels squeaked against the marble floors, a sound he'd normally oil away, but tonight he barely heard it. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the conference room scene on an endless loop. Asterisk, you should hire me. As a partner. Asterisk. Had he actually said that? Had he really stood in front of Harrison Drake, billionaire, and demanded equity in a $40 billion company while wearing a janitor's uniform? The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Thomas emptied the last trash bin on the 32nd floor. Someone had thrown away a half-eaten sandwich. Roast beef on rye, barely touched. Probably $15 from the deli downstairs. People in this building threw away more food than Thomas budgeted for groceries each week. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his mother. Asterisk, how's work, honey? Don't stay too late. Asterisk. Thomas smiled despite everything. It was 2:18 a.m. in New York, which meant 1:18 a.m. in Cleveland, and his mother was just getting home from her shift at the hospital. She always texted him every night like he was still a kid who needed checking on. Asterisk, works fine, Mom. Something interesting happened. I'll call you tomorrow. Asterisk. He couldn't tell her the truth yet. Not until he knew if tomorrow morning meant a job offer or a security escort out of the building. Maybe both. The employee locker room in the basement smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee. Thomas changed out of his uniform, hanging it carefully in his locker. Beside it hung his other uniform, khaki pants and a polo shirt for his weekend job at a bookstore in Brooklyn. 2 jobs, 7 days a week, and he was still barely making rent. Yo, Tommy. Thomas turned to see Marcus. No, wait. He could use Marcus here. Different Marcus. Jorge Rodriguez wheeling his cart into the locker room. Jorge was 53, had been cleaning office buildings for 27 years, and had a smile that made you believe the world might not be entirely terrible. You look like you've seen a ghost, man, Jorge said, opening his locker. Rough night. Something like that, Thomas said. You hear about the drama on 47? Jorge pulled out his jacket. Security radio was going crazy. Something happened in the big conference room. Drake kicked everyone out, had some kind of emergency meeting. People saying someone's getting fired. Whole executive team looked like they'd seen death when they came out. Thomas focused on tying his shoes. Yeah, you were up there tonight, right? You see anything? Nothing worth repeating, Thomas said, which was technically true. It wasn't worth repeating because no one would believe it. Jorge studied him for a moment, then shrugged. All right, keep your secrets. But Tommy, he waited until Thomas looked at him. Whatever it is, be careful. These people up there, they're not like us. They play different games with different rules. And sometimes regular folks get crushed just for being in the way. You know what I'm saying? Thomas nodded. I know. Good. Get home safe, kid. Thomas took the subway back to his studio apartment in Queens, watching the city blur past through smudged windows. The train was nearly empty at this hour. Just him, a couple of nurses in scrubs, and a man who might have been homeless or might have just had a really bad day. In New York, it was sometimes hard to tell the difference. His apartment was 340 square feet of barely affordable real estate on the 4th floor of a building that had been old when his parents were young. One room that served as bedroom, living room, and dining room. A kitchen that was technically a corner with appliances. A bathroom where you could sit on the toilet and wash your hands in the sink simultaneously if you were flexible. But it was his. Sort of. For as long as he could make rent. Thomas dropped his keys on the counter and looked at the room with fresh eyes. The futon that served as couch and bed. The desk he'd found on the street and refinished. The bookshelf made from milk crates and plywood, packed with economics texts and market analysis books he'd collected from used bookstores and library sales. On the wall, framed in cheap plastic, was his Northwestern diploma. Asterisk Bachelor of Arts in Economics. Summa cum laude. Asterisk it had cost him 4 years, roughly 80 hours a week of studying and working, and $127,000 in student loans. Current market value, slightly less than the paper it was printed on. He should sleep. He had 5 hours before he needed to be back at Sterling and Drake, and his body was already running on fumes and caffeine. But his mind wouldn't stop. Asterisk, you should hire me as a partner. Asterisk. What the hell had he been thinking? Thomas pulled out his laptop, a refurbished machine that was 4 generations old but still functional, and opened the files he'd been keeping. Not physical files. He wasn't stupid enough to steal documents, but he had a good memory and better notes. 18 months of observations, patterns in personnel movements, correlations between what got discussed in meetings and what actually appeared in quarterly reports. The gap between public statements and private doubts. All of it cataloged, cross-referenced, analyzed with the same rigor he'd applied to his thesis at Northwestern. He told himself he was just learning, preparing for when he finally broke into the industry properly. But looking at it now, he realized he'd been building something else, a case. Evidence that he understood how Sterling and Drake actually worked, not how it pretended to work. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. Thomas stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Hello. Thomas Reed. A woman's voice, professional, clipped. Speaking. This is Naomi Carter. I got your number from HR. I hope you don't mind. Thomas sat up straighter despite being alone in his apartment. Ms. Carter. I know, I don't mind. I want to talk about what happened tonight. Off the record. There's no such thing as off the record when it involves Harrison Drake. He heard something that might have been a laugh. Fair point. Listen, I don't know what Harrison's planning for tomorrow, but I wanted to tell you something before you walk into that meeting. I'm listening. You were right. About all of it. The Neural Sync deal was compromised from the start, and we missed it because we were so focused on making the numbers work that we stopped looking at what the numbers were actually saying. That's on me. That's on my entire department. She paused. But here's what you need to understand. Harrison Drake doesn't like being wrong, and he really doesn't like being shown up, especially not in front of his people, especially not by someone he saw as furniture. So you're saying tomorrow's meeting is going to go badly. I'm saying Harrison is unpredictable when his ego gets involved. He might offer you everything. He might destroy you. He might do both. Another pause. I've worked with him for 6 years, Thomas. He's brilliant and he's ruthless. And sometimes he can't tell the difference between people who challenge him and people who threaten him. Be careful which one you let him think you are. Why are you telling me this? Because you did something tonight that I should have done months ago. You told the truth when it mattered. Consequences be damned. I respect that. I also don't want to watch someone with your intelligence get chewed up by a system that eats honest people for breakfast. Her voice softened slightly. And because I looked up your background after you left. Northwestern, summa cum laude, thesis on behavioral economics in crisis scenarios. You should have been hired by someone like us 5 years ago. The fact that you weren't says more about our broken system than it does about you. Thomas felt something catch in his throat. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Just be smart tomorrow. And Thomas? Whatever happens, you've already changed something here. Drake's in his office right now, at 3 in the morning, going through every piece of trash from the last month. You made him see his blind spot. That's not nothing. She hung up before he could respond. Thomas set his phone down and stared at the ceiling of his tiny apartment. Somewhere in Manhattan, Harrison Drake was reading trash. The image was so absurd it almost made him laugh. He didn't sleep much. Around 6 a.m., he gave up pretending and took a shower in his apartment's cramped bathroom. The water pressure was terrible and the temperature control was more theoretical than actual, but it helped him think. What did he wear to a meeting that might end with a job offer or a restraining order? His wardrobe consisted of janitor uniforms, bookstore polos, 2 pairs of jeans, khakis, and 1 suit he'd bought at a Goodwill for his college graduation. The suit was too big in the shoulders and too short in the sleeves, but it was what he had. Wear whatever you want, Harrison had said. Thomas chose jeans and a button-down shirt, the one good one he owned, blue Oxford cloth, worn soft from washing. If Harrison was going to judge him, it wouldn't be because Thomas tried to pretend he was something he wasn't. The subway ride back to Lower Manhattan felt different in morning light. The train was packed with commuters, everyone in their armor of business casual and designer coffee. Thomas stood pressed against the door, watching the city wake up through the scratched windows. He arrived at Sterling and Drake at 7:43 a.m., 17 minutes early. The lobby looked different during business hours. The marble floors gleamed under natural light from the massive windows. People streamed through the security turnstiles with their ID badges and their purposeful strides, all of them belonging to a world Thomas had only ever inhabited after dark. He approached the security desk. The guard, Raymond, who Thomas knew from night shifts, did a double take. "Tommy, what are you doing here during the day?" "Meeting with Mr. Drake," Thomas said, and watched Raymond's expression shift from confused to shocked. I need to see ID." Thomas handed over his building access card. Raymond scanned it, frowned at his screen, made a phone call. 2 minutes of hushed conversation later, he handed back the card. "You're clear to go up. 47th floor. They're expecting you." The elevator ride felt endless. Thomas watched the numbers climb. 10, 20, 30, 40, 47. The doors opened onto the executive floor, and for the first time in 18 months, Thomas walked through it as something other than invisible. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect makeup and a designer dress, looked up with a practiced smile that faltered when she saw him. "Can I help you?" "Thomas Reed. I have an 8 a.m. with Mr. Drake." She checked her computer, and her professional mask slipped for just a second, revealing pure confusion. "Of course. Conference room B. Can I get you coffee or—" "I know where it is," Thomas said. "Thank you." He walked down the corridor, past offices that cost more to furnish than most people made in a year. Through glass walls, he could see executives arriving, settling into their days. A few glanced at him curiously. He clearly didn't belong to their world, but he was walking like he had a right to be there. The conference room door was closed. Through the glass, Thomas could see Harrison Drake sitting at the head of the table, exactly where he'd been the night before. Thomas checked his phone, 7:58 a.m. He took a breath, straightened his shoulders, and knocked. Harrison looked up, and their eyes met through the glass. Then Harrison smiled, that sharp, dangerous smile, and gestured for Thomas to enter. Thomas Reed opened the door and walked into the room that would change his life. He just didn't know yet whether it would change it for better or worse. The conference room smelled different in daylight, less like ambition and expensive cologne, more like coffee and the faint ozone scent of electronics running at full capacity. Harrison Drake sat at the head of the table, and spread before him was what looked like the contents of several trash bins, organized into neat piles across the mahogany surface. "You're early," Harrison said without looking up from the document he was reading. "I appreciate punctuality." Thomas closed the door behind him. "You said 8 a.m. I say a lot of things. Most people still show up late." Harrison finally looked up, and his eyes tracked over Thomas's appearance with the same analytical precision he probably applied to quarterly reports. "You didn't wear the suit." "I don't own a suit that fits." "Honest." "Good." Harrison gestured to the chair across from him, not the side of the table, but directly opposite, like they were about to play chess. "Sit. We have a lot to discuss." Thomas sat, and for the first time, he noticed the details he'd been too nervous to catch the night before. Harrison looked tired. Not exhausted, exactly, but like someone who'd burned through their usual reserves and was running on something else. Curiosity, maybe, or the kind of manic energy that came from having your worldview reorganized without permission. "I spent the night reading my trash," Harrison said, and there was something almost rueful in his voice. "Do you know how profoundly disturbing that is? To realize that the things you throw away tell a more accurate story than the reports people spend weeks preparing for you." Thomas said nothing. This felt like the kind of question that didn't want an answer. "I found a neural sync warning, exactly where you said it would be. Handwritten note from Jeremy Watts at Helix Dynamics. I remember getting it 2 weeks ago during a networking lunch. I read it, thought I'll have someone look into this, and then threw it away and forgot about it. Harrison's laugh was hollow. I delegated it to my memory, and my memory delegated it to the void. Do you know what that means? It means you've gotten used to other people remembering things for you. It means I've built a system where I'm the bottleneck and the blind spot simultaneously. Harrison pushed the note across the table. Thomas could see the handwriting, quick and sharp. Asterisk your neural sync deal. Check out the CTO. Something's off. Brandt's been making calls. J asterisk. I found 17 other pieces of intelligence in my office trash alone, Harrison continued. Risk assessments with concerning data points that got summarized into oblivion before they reached my desk. Email drafts where people started to voice concerns and then deleted them. Handwritten calculations that showed our Q3 projections were optimistic by about 22%, but the final report rounded everything in our favor. He leaned back in his chair. You were right, Thomas. My entire operation has learned to tell me what I want to hear. And I rewarded them for it by making billions and calling myself a genius. You are a genius, Thomas said. But genius without accurate information is just expensive guessing. Harrison's eyebrow raised. Is that from your thesis? It's from watching you for 18 months. Right. The invisible janitor who sees everything. Harrison stood and walked to the windows, his silhouette sharp against the morning light. I looked you up last night. Really looked you up, not just a background check. Your thesis is still available through Northwestern's library. Behavioral Economics in Market Panic. How Human Psychology Creates Predictable Patterns in Crisis Scenarios. It's good, Thomas. Really good. There's a reason it won the department's top thesis award. Thomas felt a flicker of surprise. You read my thesis? At 4 a.m., while surrounded by trash, I read your thesis. I also found the letters of recommendation from your professors. Dr. Sarah Chun called you the most naturally gifted economic analyst I've encountered in 20 years of teaching. Dr. Marcus Webb said you had an almost supernatural ability to see patterns others miss. High praise from people who don't give it easily. Harrison turned from the window. So here's my question, Thomas Reed. Why the hell are you emptying my trash instead of managing a hedge fund? I told you last night. You told me about algorithms and lack of connections. I'm asking the real question. Because I've seen your resume now, the one you sent to those 247 positions. It's good. Not perfect, but good enough that someone should have given you a shot. So what's the real reason? Thomas felt something tighten in his chest. This was the part of the story he usually edited out, the detail that didn't make it into the sanitized version he told his mother or the professional summary he put on applications. You want the truth? I'm literally sitting in a room full of trash because you told me truth matters. Yes, I want the truth. I had 3 final round interviews, Thomas said quietly. 3 companies that made it past the resume, past the phone screens, all the way to in-person meetings. The first was a Blackstone. I met with a partner who spent 20 minutes asking about my thesis, seemed genuinely interested. Then he asked where I summered during college. I told him I worked construction and night shifts at a warehouse. He wrapped up the interview in 5 minutes. Never called back. Harrison listened without interrupting. Second interview was at Morgan Stanley. Made it through 2 rounds, got to the final interview with a managing director. Everything was going great until he asked about my family background. I told him about my dad's hardware store, how I grew up helping with inventory and learning about margins before I knew what they were called. He smiled and said, "That's charming, but we're looking for someone who understands wealth management from a client perspective." I didn't get that job either. And the third, Goldman Sachs. I made it all the way to the final round, 6 interviews deep. They flew me out, put me up in a hotel, the full treatment. Last interview was with a senior partner. She looked at my resume and said, "You're clearly intelligent, Thomas, but you don't have the polish we need for client-facing roles. Maybe try back office operations." Thomas met Harrison's eyes. She meant I don't look like money. Don't talk like it. Don't wear it naturally enough to make rich people comfortable giving me theirs. The silence that followed was heavy. So I stopped applying, Thomas continued. Took the janitorial job because it paid better than retail and left my days free for other work. Told myself I was learning, preparing, building skills. But really, I was hiding. It's easier to be invisible than to keep getting rejected for not being born into the right zip code. Harrison walked back to the table and sat down. When he spoke, his voice was different, less performative, more human. I'm going to tell you something I don't talk about much. My father gave me $2 million to start this company. Everyone knows that part. It's in all the profiles. What they don't know is that he gave my older brother $5 million 2 years earlier. James was the golden child, the one who'd gone to Harvard business like Dad, who played golf at the right clubs and married the right woman from the right family. Thomas wasn't sure where this was going, but he listened. James lost all $5 million in 18 months. Bad investments, worse partnerships, and a cocaine habit that made both problems exponentially worse. Dad bailed him out quietly, got him into rehab, set him up with a trust fund that keeps him comfortable in Connecticut where he can't embarrass the family name. Harrison's smile was bitter. I got $2 million because I was the backup plan, the spare heir, the one who was supposed to do something respectable but not too ambitious. I was supposed to maybe run a boutique investment firm, manage some family money, marry well, and not make waves. But you built a $40 billion empire instead. I built it because I was angry, because I wanted to prove that I wasn't just a backup, because every time someone underestimated me, I used it as fuel. Harrison leaned forward. So when I look at you, Thomas, I see something I recognize. Someone who's angry at being underestimated. Someone who's been watching from the outside and learning how the game actually works. The difference is you've been patient. You've been methodical. You spent 18 months studying this company like it's a doctoral thesis, and now you know things about how we operate that I'm only just discovering. So what happens now? Thomas asked. Harrison pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. That's your employment contract. Not janitorial, partnership track. You'll start as an associate partner with a focus on strategic intelligence and risk assessment. Salary is $180,000 base, plus performance bonuses that could double that in a good year. After 1 year, assuming you prove your value, you move to junior partner with equity, starting at 2% with the potential to vest up to 5% over 5 years. Thomas stared at the folder like it might bite him. There are conditions, Harrison continued. First, you keep doing what you've been doing, reading the trash, seeing the patterns, finding the truth everyone else is too polished to notice. Second, you report directly to me, no intermediaries, no filters. When you see something, you tell me, even if it makes people uncomfortable. Especially if it makes people uncomfortable. Third, he paused. You can never lie to me. Not to spare my feelings, not to protect yourself, not for any reason. I have enough people who lie. I need one person who doesn't. Thomas opened the folder with shaking hands. The contract was real. The numbers were real. His name was spelled correctly at the top. Why? Thomas asked. Why are you doing this? Because you were right last night. I've built a company where everyone's too afraid to tell me the truth. That's a recipe for catastrophic failure. It's just a question of when, not if. Neural Sync would have been $2.3 billion down the drain. What's next? What am I not seeing because my people have learned that disagreeing with me is career suicide? Harrison's expression was intense. You said I need someone who sees my blind spots. You're right. And you're the only person in this building who's been in a position to see them clearly. Thomas looked at the contract, then at Harrison. You're taking a massive risk. You barely know me. I know you could have kept your mouth shut last night. Could have let me walk into that disaster and kept collecting your $18.50 an hour. Instead, you humiliated me in front of my executives and demanded a partnership. That tells me you're either insane or you have integrity. Either way, you're interesting, and I haven't been interested in a long time. What about your team? Naomi Carter, the others, they're not going to like this. Naomi already called me this morning. She thinks you're brilliant and that I should hire you before someone else does. As for the others, Harrison shrugged. They'll adapt or they'll leave. My company, my decision. Thomas read through the contract. It was straightforward, almost surprisingly so. None of the labyrinthine clauses he'd expected. Just clear terms, clear expectations, clear compensation. I need to ask, Thomas said. Is this guilt? Are you doing this because you feel bad about mocking me last night? Harrison actually laughed. If I felt guilty every time I mocked someone, I'd be bankrupt from settlement payments. No, Thomas. This is self-interest. You have information I need and skills I need and a perspective I need. And yes, maybe there's a small part of me that likes the idea of proving that talent matters more than pedigree. Maybe I want to watch the Goldmans and Morgans of the world choke on their own snobbery when they see what you accomplish here. His smile turned sharp. Is that a good enough reason? Thomas thought about his mother working double shifts, about his studio apartment and his student loans, about his Northwestern diploma on the wall, and the 3 years he'd spent being told he wasn't good enough. He thought about the trash he'd read and the patterns he'd seen and the 18 months of being invisible. I have one condition, Thomas said. Harrison raised an eyebrow. You're negotiating? You said I should never lie to you. That goes both ways. You don't lie to me either. Not about the company, not about risks, not about what you're really thinking. If I'm supposed to see your blind spots, I need you to be honest about what you can and can't see. For a moment, Harrison just stared at him. Then he extended his hand across the table, across the scattered trash and the contract and the gulf between their worlds. Deal, Harrison said. Welcome to Sterling and Drake, Thomas Reed. Try not to make me regret this. Thomas shook his hand. Harrison's grip was firm, certain, the handshake of someone who'd built empires. But Thomas's grip was just as firm. Because he built something too, just not out of money. He'd built himself out of nothing, and now he was about to find out what that was worth. 3 months into his new life, Thomas Reed sat in the same conference room where he'd been mocked, except now he had a nameplate on the door and an assistant who called him Mr. Reed, even though he'd asked her not to. The transformation had been surreal. One day, he was emptying trash bins in a gray uniform. The next, he had an office on the 47th floor with a view of the Hudson River and a salary that made his student loan payments feel manageable for the first time in his adult life. His mother had cried when he told her. Real, shoulder-shaking sobs of relief that her son might finally be okay. But the real change wasn't the office or the money. It was the way people looked at him now, or rather, the way they'd started looking at him at all. He was no longer invisible. He was someone they needed to notice. Morning, Thomas. Naomi Carter walked into the conference room, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one, black, no sugar, exactly how he took it. She made a point of learning these details. Ready for the circus? Is it going to be that bad? Worse. She sat down across from him, and Thomas noticed the dark circles under her eyes. Naomi had become something unexpected over the past 3 months, an ally. After the initial shock of his promotion had worn off, she'd been the first to reach out, the first to treat him like a colleague instead of an anomaly. The board is bringing in Whitmore from the SEC investigation, Peterson from the lawsuit, and apparently Douglas McKinney himself is flying in from London. Thomas felt his stomach drop. McKinney? Why is the chairman coming? Because you've made Harrison look very good or very stupid, depending on who's talking, and the board wants to know which it is. Naomi sipped her coffee. The NeuralSync deal falling apart publicly, the subsequent investigation into Michael Brandt's patent theft scheme, Sterling and Drake being praised in the Wall Street Journal for unprecedented due diligence. It's been a lot of press. Good press, mostly. But the board wants to understand how a janitor spotted a multi-billion-dollar fraud that our entire acquisitions team missed. Former janitor, Thomas corrected quietly. They're not going to see it that way. To them, you're either a genius Harrison discovered or a liability he's gambling on. She leaned forward. Thomas, I need you to understand something. What you did, catching the NeuralSync fraud, identifying the shell companies in the Meridian Tech deal, finding the accounting irregularities in our own Q3 report before the auditors did, you've made a lot of people in this company look incompetent. Some of them are scared, some are angry, and some are actively hoping you fail spectacularly so they can say I told you so. Which category do you fall into? Naomi smiled. The category of people who are tired of being surrounded by yes men and appreciate someone who gives a damn about the truth. But I'm in the minority. She checked her watch. Board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Harrison wants you there. Be what? You're presenting. The whole breakdown of how you've been sourcing intelligence, what patterns you've identified, why your methods work. It's your audition, Thomas. Pass this, and you're legitimate. Fail, and you're a publicity stunt that Harrison will quietly move back to night shift. Thomas felt his mouth go dry. He didn't tell me I was presenting. Of course he didn't. Harrison likes to see how people perform under pressure. Welcome to the show. The boardroom was on the 49th floor, a space Thomas had only seen while cleaning it at 11 p.m. on Wednesdays. In daylight, filled with Sterling and Drake's board of directors, it felt like a completely different universe. Douglas McKinney sat at the head of the table. 72 years old, British aristocracy mixed with American corporate brutality, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Thomas's entire wardrobe. His eyes were sharp and calculating as Thomas entered. "Ah," McKinney said, his accent pure Oxford by way of Manhattan boardrooms. "The famous Janitor. Do sit down, Mr. Reed." Thomas sat. Harrison was already there, along with Naomi and 6 other board members Thomas recognized from company photos but had never met. They looked at him like scientists examining an interesting specimen. "Mr. Reed," McKinney began, "we've heard remarkable things about your work these past 3 months. We've also heard some concerning questions about your methods. Mr. Drake assures us you're a valuable asset. I'm here to determine if that's true or if we're exposing this company to unnecessary risk by employing someone with unconventional approaches. What would you like to know, sir?" Thomas kept his voice steady. "Let's start with neural sync. Walk us through exactly how you identified the fraud. And please be specific." Thomas glanced at Harrison, who gave him the slightest nod. He took a breath and began. "I noticed the initial red flag in discarded SEC filings, specifically an amended Form 4, showing drive Rebecca Vance's share transfer to CTO Michael Brandt at 38 cents on the dollar. That's unusual. Founders don't typically sell shares at a massive loss unless they know something the market doesn't. So I started looking for patterns." "Looking where?" asked a board member Thomas didn't recognize, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair. "In the trash, initially, but also in public records, patent filings, LinkedIn activity, even social media." Brand had been connecting with executives at 3 of Sterling and Drake's competitors over a 6-week period. Not suspicious on its own, but combined with the share transfer and the timing of our acquisition talks, it suggested he was positioning himself for something. "This is circumstantial," McKinney said. Thomas agreed, until I found a burner phone bill. The room went quiet. One of the junior analysts had printed a phone record. It was in an email attachment that got flagged by our security system for containing potential personal information. The analyst printed it, looked at it, and threw it away. I pulled it from the recycling. The number wasn't registered to anyone at NeuralSync officially, but the call patterns matched Brandt's known schedule. He was making 20-minute calls to the same 3 numbers every Tuesday and Thursday for 6 weeks. I traced those numbers through public records. They belonged to patent attorneys at Helix Dynamics, Quantum Shield, and Northstar Defense. McKinney leaned forward. "You traced burner phone numbers through public records?" "Patent attorneys have to file contact information with the USPTO. I cross-referenced calling times with court filings, meeting schedules, even parking records from the buildings where those calls were made. It took 2 weeks, but I built a timeline that showed Brandt was systematically shopping NeuralSync's core patents while we were negotiating to buy the company." "That's—" The steel-haired woman paused. "That's extraordinary detective work." "It's pattern recognition," Thomas said. "The same skills that make someone good at economics, seeing how individual data points connect to create larger narratives. I just applied it to information most people throw away." "And you're still doing this?" McKinney asked. "Still going through the company's trash?" Thomas met his eyes. "Every night. I finish my partner duties by 6 p.m., then I spend 4 hours doing what I did before, collecting intelligence everyone else has discarded. The trash tells me what people actually think versus what they're willing to say in meetings. It's the most honest data stream in this entire building." A board member Thomas recognized as Calvin Mercer, former CEO of a Fortune 500 tech company, spoke up. "Isn't this a privacy concern? Reading employee communications, going through confidential materials?" "I only read what's been thrown away," Thomas said. "Once something's in the trash, There's no legal expectation of privacy. More importantly, I'm looking for patterns that indicate risk to the company, not personal information. I don't care about someone's lunch order or their personal emails. I care about the draft risk assessment that gets printed and discarded because it contradicts the narrative someone wants to present. I care about the Excel sheet showing real numbers before they get adjusted for the final report. I care about the gaps between what we know and what we're pretending we know. What would you do if you discovered your company was missing critical information simply because no one wanted to deliver bad news? Would you speak up, even if it meant challenging the people in power? Drop your thoughts below. Asterisk, asterisk. McKinney studied Thomas for a long moment. Mr. Drake, step outside, please. Harrison's jaw tightened, but he stood and left the boardroom without argument. The door clicked shut behind him. Now, Mr. Reed, McKinney said once they were alone, tell us what you really think of Harrison Drake. This was the test. Thomas understood it immediately. They want to know if he was Harrison's puppet or his own person. Harrison is brilliant, Thomas said carefully. He has instincts for market movement that I've never seen anywhere else, including in academic literature. But he's also built a culture where people are afraid to disagree with him. That fear creates blind spots. The NeuralSync deal was happening because everyone was so focused on making Harrison's vision work that they stopped looking for reasons it wouldn't. My value isn't that I'm smarter than the people here. I'm not. My value is that I'm not afraid to tell him when he's wrong. And has he been wrong? Asked Mercer. 3 times in 3 months. Once on the Meridian Tech valuation, he was overconfident about their Asia market penetration. Once on the internal restructuring plan that would have eliminated positions that we later realized were critical. And once when he wanted to fire the entire acquisitions team after NeuralSync fell apart. He wanted to fire Naomi Carter's team. He was angry and embarrassed. I told him that firing competent people for following the culture he created was stupid and vindictive. We argued for 2 hours. Eventually, he agreed to restructure instead of purge. Thomas paused. He doesn't always like what I tell him, but he listens. That's more than most people in his position would do. McKinney exchanged glances with the other board members. Something passed between them, some silent communication that Thomas couldn't read. Mr. Reed, McKinney said finally, Harrison has proposed increasing your equity stake to 5% immediately and putting you on the succession planning track. That would make you, at 28 years old, one of the youngest partners in company history with a clear path to senior leadership. It would also make you very wealthy. The board's concern is that this is happening very fast, and we need to know if you're a flash in the pan or the real thing. Thomas felt his heart hammering. What would convince you on the real thing? Time, results, consistency. McKinney stood, and the others followed his lead. We're approving Harrison's proposal, Mr. Reed. Congratulations on your 5% equity stake. But understand this. You will be watched more closely than any other partner in this company. Your methods are unorthodox, your background is unusual, and your rise has been meteoric. Some people believe you're exactly what Sterling and Drake needs. Others think you're a liability waiting to detonate. You have 1 year to prove which they are correct. I understand, sir. I hope you do. McKinney walked toward the door, then paused. One more question. Why didn't you take the easy path? You could have kept quiet about NeuralSync, kept your janitorial job, stayed invisible. Why risk everything? Thomas thought about his mother's double shifts, his father's failed hardware store, the 3 years of rejections, and the invisible weight of being told he wasn't good enough. Because I spent 3 years being told I didn't belong in this world, Thomas said quietly. And I needed to know if they were right or if the world was just rigged. Turns out it's both. The world is rigged, but that doesn't mean you can't beat it. You just have to be willing to see what everyone else refuses to look at. McKinney smiled, the first genuine smile Thomas had seen from him. Well said, Mr. Reed. Don't waste this opportunity. 6 months later, Thomas stood in front of his bathroom mirror in an apartment that didn't require him to sit on the toilet to wash his hands. The new place in Brooklyn had 2 bedrooms, central air, and a doorman who actually remembered his name. His mother was visiting for the weekend, sleeping in the guest room, marveling at the fact that her son had a guest room. His phone buzzed. A message from Harrison. Asterisk board meeting went well. McKinney officially endorsed you for junior managing partner. Congratulations. Also, Naomi found something in the Hexagon merger docs. Coming early tomorrow. Asterisk. Thomas smiled. Even success didn't slow down at Sterling and Drake. Another message, this one from an unknown number. Asterisk, Mr. Reed. This is Patricia Hollings from Goldman Sachs. We met 3 years ago regarding a position. I recently saw your profile in Forbes. I'd love to discuss opportunities. Please call me at your earliest convenience. Asterisk. Thomas stared at the message for a long moment. Patricia Hollings, the senior partner who'd told him he didn't have the polish for client-facing roles, who'd suggested he try back-office operations, who'd rejected him because he didn't look like money. He could call her back, could take a meeting just to see the look on her face when she realized the unpolished candidate was now a partner at a $40 billion firm with his face in Forbes. Could enjoy that small, petty victory. Instead, Thomas deleted the message. He didn't need Goldman Sachs anymore. He didn't need their validation or their approval or their carefully coded classism wrapped in professional courtesy. He'd built something better. His mother emerged from the guest room in her bathrobe, her hair wrapped in a scarf. You're up early, baby. Can't sleep. Too much on my mind. She walked over and hugged him, the kind of hug only mothers give, the ones that make you feel like you're 6 years old and everything might actually be okay. Your daddy would be so proud of you. You know that, right? Thomas felt his throat tighten. I wish he could see this. He sees it. I know he does. She pulled back and looked at him with eyes that had seen too much hardship and still managed to find joy. You did it, Thomas. You actually did it. You took all those people who said no and proved them wrong. I got lucky, Thomas said. I happened to be in the right place at the right time. Baby, luck is what happens when hard work meets opportunity. You made yourself ready. You studied and learned and paid attention when everyone else was looking away. That's not luck. That's you being brilliant. She smiled. Now come on. I'm making breakfast. Real breakfast. Not that sad cereal I saw in your cupboard. As his mother moved toward the kitchen, humming softly, Thomas looked out the window at Brooklyn waking up below. Somewhere out there were other kids like him, brilliant, hardworking from the wrong zip codes and the wrong schools and the wrong families. Kids who'd be told they didn't have the polish, the pedigree, the right look. He couldn't change the whole system, but maybe he could crack it open just enough to let a few more people through. His phone buzzed again. Harrison, asterisk also, start thinking about who we should hire. Need 3 new analysts. Your pick. Choose people who see what others miss. Asterisk. Thomas smiled and started typing. Asterisk, I have some ideas. Looking for candidates who've been underestimated. They tend to be the hungriest. Asterisk. Harrison's response was immediate. Asterisk perfect. Build me an army of invisible people who see everything. Let's see what happens when we let the janitors run the building. Asterisk. Thomas laughed and set down his phone. Through the kitchen doorway, he could hear his mother singing now. An old gospel song from his childhood, something about making a way out of no way. The smell of eggs and bacon filled the apartment, warm and familiar and safe. He'd started as invisible, a janitor pushing a cart through a world that didn't see him. But he'd been watching, learning, building a catalog of everything they threw away, every truth they didn't want to see. And when the moment came, when the billionaire CEO had tried to humiliate him for sport, Thomas had spoken the words that changed everything. You're asking the wrong question, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to answer what's asked. It's to challenge the question itself, to see what everyone else has trained themselves to ignore, to be brave enough to speak truth to power, even when power is laughing at you. Thomas Reed had been invisible, but now he was seen. And he was going to make damn sure he wasn't the last invisible person who got that chance. Thomas, his mother called. Breakfast is ready. Come on, Mom, he called back. And as he walked toward the kitchen, toward his mother's cooking and her love and the life he'd fought so hard to build, Thomas Reed smiled. He'd made it, not in spite of being the janitor, but because of it, because the trash had told him the truth, and the truth had set him free.